In a boardroom built on 100 years of old money, Julian Vance, a young black CEO, extended his hand. The $5 billion merger was final. But Arthur Harrington, the family patriarch and chairman, just stared at the outstretched hand. He smirked, a cruel, thin smile. "We'll take your money, Mr. Vance," Harrington said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "But we don't shake hands with new money." The insult was clear, the meaning, people like you. The room, full of investors, was silent. The humiliation was total. But what Arthur didn't know was that the black CEO he just insulted had a secret clause in the contract, a clause that, by morning, would not just cancel the merger, but transfer ownership of Harrington's entire debt portfolio directly to him.
The boardroom at Harrington Holdings was not just a room. It was a tomb. It was a 100-year-old monument to a dying world. The air itself felt heavy, smelling of old leather, floor wax, and the faint bitter scent of cigar smoke trapped in the dark mahogany walls for generations. The room was a cathedral of old money, built to make visitors feel small, insignificant. And the god of this cathedral? Arthur Harrington. He sat at the head of a 40-foot stone table, a 75-year-old patriarch of a dynasty that had built its fortune on steel, railroads, and an unshakable belief that his blood was purer than anyone else's. His suit was a three-piece fortress of bespoke wool. His silver hair was perfect. His eyes, the color of a frozen lake, held no warmth at all. For a century, men like Harrington had made the world turn. Today, their world was ending. And the man ending it was sitting at the other end of the table. Julian Vance. He was 34. He wore a modern razor-sharp suit with no tie. He was the son of a postman from Atlanta. And he was the self-made founder and CEO of Vance Digital, a global tech empire he had built from a single line of code in his college dorm room. The tension in the room was so thick you could taste it. This was not a friendly merger. It was an invasion. It was the future arriving, uninvited, to claim the past. Julian's new money tech firm was absorbing Harrington's old money industrial empire in a hostile takeover. The price, $5 billion. The board members, all white, all over 60, all in suits that looked like uniforms, shifted uncomfortably. They were rats on a sinking ship, and they knew it. "Well, Mr. Vance," Harrington finally spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly monotone, the sound of privilege that has never been questioned. "The accountants have all signed. The lawyers have all billed." He paused, letting his gaze drift to the oil paintings of his father, and his father that lined the walls. "It seems," he continued, a thin smile touching his lips, "the barbarians are well and truly at the gate." The other board members let out a few, weak, sycophantic chuckles. Julian Vance said nothing. He simply sat, his hands resting calmly on the table. He was a panther in a room full of old lions, and his stillness was more threatening than any roar. "All that's left," said Harrington's nervous CFO, a man named Davis, "is the final handshake. The ceremonial press photo." A photographer, who had been hiding in the corner, stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington, Mr. Vance, if you'd please," the photographer motioned. Julian stood. The sound of his chair sliding back was the only noise in the tomb. He buttoned his suit jacket. He walked the full 40-foot length of the table, his footsteps echoing on the 100-year-old marble. He stopped at the head of the table, standing over the seated patriarch. And he extended his hand. The room, and everyone in it, stopped breathing. Arthur Harrington did not move. He slowly, deliberately, looked up at Julian. He looked at his modern suit. His young, confident face. And then, with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain, he looked down at Julian's outstretched brown hand. He stared at that hand as if it were a piece of filth. 1 second. 2. 3. The photographer raised his camera, unsure. A cruel, thin, reptilian smile spread across Harrington's ancient face. He did not lift his hand. "We'll take your money, Mr. Vance," Harrington said, his voice loud enough for every board member, every lawyer, and God himself to hear. "But we don't shake hands with new money." The insult hung in the air, a public execution of dignity. New money. The oldest, cleanest-sounding slur old money could find. Everyone in the room knew what it meant. People like you. Click. The photographer's camera flash went off, a silent explosion, capturing the exact agonizing moment. The powerful black CEO, his hand still extended in an offering of peace, and the white patriarch, sitting back, smirking in absolute racist refusal. Julian did not flinch. He did not get angry. He did not pull his hand back in shame. A mask of polite, surgical ice slid over his features. He held his hand in the air for one more beat, forcing them all to watch the refusal, forcing them to be complicit in it. Then slowly, he retracted his hand and placed it back in his pocket. Understood. His voice was perfectly level, quiet, colder than the eyes of the man in front of him. Understood, Mr. Harrington. Then let's not delay. Let's proceed with the final review. Julian returned to his seat. The 40-foot walkback was a gauntlet of silent, smirking stares. Every board member watched him. The photographer had lowered his camera, but his eyes were wide, documenting the humiliation. Julian sat, placed his hands on the table, and looked at Arthur Harrington. He didn't look defeated. He looked patient. Harrington, in turn, felt a sharp, bitter pang of disappointment. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He had wanted sport. He had wanted the young, new money barbarian to yell, to curse, to get aggressive. He wanted Julian to prove him right, to show the uncontrolled emotion that Harrington believed was inherent in people like him. He wanted a performance. And Julian had denied him. That, more than anything, was the real offense. Yes, let's, Harrington sneered, his voice dripping with a new kind of venom. The venom of a predator whose prey refused to run. Let's proceed. He decided that if he couldn't get an emotional victory, he would execute a public, intellectual one. He would dismantle this man, piece by piece, in front of the board that was about to be his. Before we hand over the keys to a 100-year-old legacy, Harrington said, opening a leather-bound folder. I'd like to hear one last time what your disruptive task force plans to do. He spat the words disruptive task force like they were a disease. Charles, Harrington barked, not even looking at the young, 30-something executive to his left. You've reviewed the file. Walk us through Mr. Vance's strategy. Charles, a man whose entire career was built on agreeing with Arthur Harrington, stood and fumbled with his tablet. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously between Harrington and the impossibly calm man at the other end of the table. Well, sir. Mr. Vance's projections are. Charles searched for the word. They're aggressive. Aggressive, Harrington repeated, savoring the word. He let it hang in the air. As in reckless. As in uncivilized. I mean, sir, he plans to sunset the entire physical logistics division. In 6 months, Charles stammered. And pivot to an all-digital marketplace. Harrington held up a hand, a gesture of mock horror. Stop. All digital. Mr. Vance, he said, fixing Julian with a condescending stare, do you know what we do here? We build things. Steel. Concrete. Shipping. Things you can touch. Things that built this nation. You want to replace a century of hard assets with, what? Clicks. Code. Influencers. The board chuckled again, more confidently this time. They were back on familiar ground. Julian simply uncapped a heavy, gold-plated pen. He opened a black, moleskine notebook on the table in front of him. And he made a small note. My projections are based on market trajectory, Mr. Harrington, Julian's voice, perfectly level, cut through the laughter. Your hard assets are liabilities. They are bleeding $200 million a quarter. My algorithm will save this company $800 million in the first year alone. It's all in the report you signed. Harrington's face darkened. He hated being corrected. He hated the word algorithm. He hated the calm. Harvard, wasn't it, Vance? Harrington snapped, changing tactics. Stanford, Julian corrected him, without looking up from his notebook. Ah, yes. California. Even worse, Harrington sneered. They let anyone in these days, don't they? All that. Diversity. Tell me, Did they teach you the difference between a balance sheet and a brand identity? In my day, we built businesses on sweat and steel, not social media synergy. Another board member, emboldened, chimed in. The marketing proposal here. It's very loud, isn't it? Our brand is about quiet dignity. This is, well, it's not very us. For the next hour, this was the entire meeting. It was a public hazing. They took turns. They picked apart Julian's career. They called his strategies novel. They called his marketing loud. They called his background unconventional. Every word was a synonym for black. And through it all, Julian Vance sat there. He didn't fidget. His breathing was even. When they insulted his logistics plan, he wrote a note. When they mocked his marketing strategy, he wrote a note. When Harrington himself made a comment about how people from your kind of background often struggle to adapt to a culture of this level, Julian just wrote a note. His calm was a mirror. It reflected their bigotry back at them, and it made them furious. Well, Harrington finally said, slamming his leather folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I suppose we're done here. We've taken your money. You've gotten your company. He stood, a final act of dominance. I hope you know what to do with it. Charles, have my car brought around. The board members began to stand, a palpable sense of relief in the room. They had survived. They had shown loyalty to the old king, even as the new one took the throne. But as they gathered their papers, Julian's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the room. Just one moment, Mr. Harrington. Every man froze. Harrington turned slowly, his face a mask of rage. What is it now, boy? Julian stood, buttoned his jacket. His face was still an unreadable mask of cold, polite ice. I need to use the restroom, Julian said. Before my flight. I'll be right back. He stood, turned, and walked calmly out of the boardroom. Julian did not go to the restroom. He walked past the grand marble-arched doorway marked Gentlemen. He moved with no wasted motion, his footsteps silent on the 100-year-old Persian runner. The long mahogany hallway was a canyon of shadows, lined on both sides by the oil-painted portraits of the Harrington dynasty. Every pale, stern face seemed to watch him, their dead eyes full of the same disdain as the man in the boardroom. They were the ghosts of an empire. And they were about to meet the man who would become their executor. Julian didn't stop until he reached the very end of the hall, in a small dark alcove. There, under a massive looming portrait of the company's founder, Harrington I, he stopped. He stood in the shadow of the man who had built it all. A symbolic, and final, changing of the guard. He pulled his phone from his inner suit pocket. It was not a nervous fumble. It was a practiced, precise movement. He pressed 1 on his speed dial. His chief legal officer, Alicia Mendez, picked up on the first ring. She was the sharpest corporate lawyer in New York, and she had been on standby, waiting for this specific call for 3 hours. Alicia, Julian said. His voice was not the polite, quiet tone from the boardroom. It was a whisper of pure, cold steel. It's done. He's in breach. The voice on the other end was professional, but tense. The handshake. And about 40 other things, Julian said, his eyes scanning the dark hallway. He called me boy. He called my Stanford education a diversity quota. He called my strategies loud, aggressive, and uncivilized. He refused my hand in front of his entire board and the press photographer. He paused, thinking of the notes in his moleskine notebook. Each one a nail. The notes I took, he said. They aren't reminders. They're a time-stamped list of evidence. He's earned it. There was a half-second of silence on the other end. Not of doubt, but of confirmation. Alicia knew what came next. Julian, she said, her voice low, you understand what you're asking. Executing 12B isn't just a penalty. It's a nuclear option. It's not just voiding the merger, it's the debt. The collateral. It's everything. Are you absolutely certain? Julian looked up at the portrait of Harrington I. The man who had built an empire on steel and, as Julian's research had shown, on the broken backs of immigrant labor. He thought of his own father, the postman, who had worked 40 years without a single complaint to give his son a chance. He thought of Harrington's sneer. New money. He asked me if they taught me the difference between a balance sheet and a brand identity, Julian whispered into the phone. He's about to learn that I'm a master of both. He turned his back to the portrait. It's not a nuclear option, Alicia. It's a dignity clause. And they have none. Execute Section 12B. And yes, activate the debt transfer. Immediately. Consider it done, she replied. The wires are live. The triggers are set. The moment I hang up, the system begins the acquisition. It will take approximately 3 minutes for the first alerts to hit their terminals. Thank you, Alicia. Godspeed, Julian. He hung up. He didn't move. He just stood in the silence of the hallway. He thought about Section 12B. It was his masterpiece. A beautiful, poetic, and lethal piece of legal art, buried 400 pages deep in the merger addendum. It was a clause he and Alicia had drafted 6 months ago, specifically for this deal. It was a trap. He knew men like Arthur Harrington. He knew they couldn't help themselves. Their pride, their racism, their arrogance, it was a sickness. He knew Harrington would need to humiliate him to feel in control. And that clause was a loaded gun, waiting for Harrington to pull the trigger. He had 3 minutes. That's what she said. Julian checked his platinum watch. He straightened his suit cuffs. He smoothed the front of his jacket. He took one deep centering breath, letting the hunter recede, letting the mask of the calm, polite guest slide back into place. He looked back at the portrait of Harrington, the first one last time. Your family built this house, he whispered to the painting. Thank you for handing me the keys. He turned and began the long, quiet walk back to the boardroom. Back to the men whose lives he had just, with a single phone call, taken apart. When Julian re-entered, the atmosphere in the boardroom was one of relief. The old lions had finished their hazing, and the tension had finally broken. Board members were standing, putting on their expensive overcoats, laughing quietly, and making lunch reservations. Arthur Harrington was at the head of the table, looking at his platinum Patek Philippe watch, his face a mask of visible, annoyed impatience. Finished. Harrington snapped, not bothering to look up. My car is waiting. Julian walked past him, back to his own seat at the far end of the table. He didn't sit. He just stood there, a silent, dark statue in the tomb of mahogany. Almost, Julian said. And then, the sound. It wasn't a loud noise. It was not a gunshot. It was something far more modern, and far more lethal. A high-pitched, electronic ping. A single, digital alert. Every man in the room, trained by decades of financial warfare, froze. The CFO, Davis, the nervous man who had been sweating all morning, pulled his phone from his pocket. He looked at it. And all the color drained from his face. His blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing in a silent gasp. His hand, holding the $2,000 phone, began to shake violently. Arthur. Davis whispered, his voice a dry croak. Arthur. What is it, Davis? Spit it out. I have a lunch to get to, Harrington barked, his patience gone. Our primary credit line, Davis stammered, his eyes wide with a primal terror that no one in that room had ever seen before. From SwissGen, it's been frozen. Effective. 30 seconds ago. Before Harrington could even process the words credit line and frozen in the same sentence, another phone pinged. And another. And another. Ping. 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 It was the entire board. A chorus of digital panic. The young sycophant, Charles, was staring at his tablet, his face a mask of complete idiotic disbelief. Sir, Charles shrieked, his voice cracking into an adolescent squeal. The market just halted trading on our ticker. HHLD. It's frozen. They're citing pending material information. The room exploded. It was instantaneous chaos. Men who had been legends of finance 30 seconds earlier were now just terrified, yelling old men. What's happening? Call legal. Is it a hack? Are we being hacked? Someone get the exchange on the line. Harrington's face, just moments before so smug, had turned a deep, blotchy purple. He was a man suffocating. He stood, his fists clenched on the stone table, his knuckles white. What is going on? he bellowed, his voice echoing off the portraits of his ancestors. Davis was shaking, scrolling frantically, his thumb smearing the glass of his phone. It's not just Swiss Gen. It's all of them. Our assets, our liquidity, it's all locked. I can't move anything. He looked up, his eyes finding Harrington's. Our debt. Arthur, our entire corporate debt portfolio, $5 billion. It's been bought. The notification just came through. All of it. In one block. It's been acquired. By. The name wouldn't come. It was too impossible. Julian Vance, who had not moved, who had watched the entire implosion in perfect cold silence, leaned forward into the chaos. His voice, calm and clear, cut through the panic like a diamond. Vance Digital. Is that the name you're looking for? Mr. Davis. The yelling stopped. Dead. Every eye in the room, terrified, confused, enraged, snapped to Julian. Harrington stared, his mouth open, his proud patrician face contorted in a mask of grotesque confusion. You. What did you do? Julian Vance stood tall. He was no longer the polite guest. He was no longer the new money kid. He was the owner. You were right, Arthur, Julian said, his voice now commanding the room. It is about culture. About protocol. About who you are when you think you have all the power. Which is why my lawyers, knowing exactly who I was dealing with, inserted Section 12B into the merger agreement. He looked around the room, making eye contact with every single board member who had laughed at him. We call it the dignity clause. That's not real. That's absurd. Charles stammered. Oh, it's very real, Julian said. Your CFO signed it. Your entire legal team read it. They just thought it was ceremonial. Unenforceable. They underestimated me. Just like you did. The clause, Julian continued, states that any act of public misconduct, overt discrimination, or bad faith humiliation by you or your board during the final signing period constitutes an immediate catastrophic breach of contract. That's illegal. You can't. Harrington screamed, lunging forward. Is it? Julian replied, not taking a single step back. I have a 4K video recording from the press photographer of you refusing my handshake. I have my own audio recording of you calling me boy. And I have a Moleskine notebook, full of time-stamped quotes from every single one of you. It's not illegal, Arthur. It's just smart. He let that hang in the air. And the breach, Julian continued, triggers a penalty. It doesn't just void the merger. It triggers an immediate automatic liquidation option on all outstanding corporate debt, an option which I held, and which I exercised 3 minutes ago. From the hallway. He took a step toward Harrington. You're $5 billion in debt? It's not frozen. It's mine. Harrington's purple face had gone a ghostly, ashen white. He stared at Julian, his mind, once a fortress of arrogance, now a collapsing ruin. He couldn't speak. His entire world, his name, his legacy, his 100-year-old company, had been taken from him in less time than it takes to smoke a cigar. He didn't just lose. He'd been deleted. You. He finally sputtered, his voice a pathetic croak. You, that's theft. It's corporate espionage. It's illegal. You boy. It was the last gasp of a dying king. Before Julian could even respond, the CFO Davis, who was still staring, hypnotized, at his terminal, whispered the final eulogy. Arthur. He said, his voice completely dead. He's right. It's legal. I'm looking at the addendum. Section 12B, the dignity clause. Oh my God. It's real. Our lawyers, they flagged it as non-standard, but they approved it. They thought it was just symbolic. Symbolic, Julian repeated. He finally allowed himself a small, cold, devastating smile. It didn't touch his eyes. You see, Arthur, Julian said, his voice conversational, as if explaining a complex but interesting puzzle, you and your team, your 20th century predators. You understand brute force. Hostile takeovers. Crushing the competition. You don't understand surgical warfare. He began to walk slowly, pacing the length of the 40-foot table. His footsteps were the only sound. You thought I was new money. You were right. I am. And new money understands something you don't. We understand that in 2025, data is the new steel. And dignity has a market cap. He stopped and looked at the terrified board members, who were frozen in their seats. Your lawyers, your old money team. They saw Section 12B and they scoffed. They thought it was ceremonial. Unenforceable. They probably called it some new age woke nonsense. They, like you, were blinded by arrogance. He turned his full attention back to Harrington. But I knew who you were, Arthur. I've been studying you for a year. I knew you couldn't help yourself. Your pride, your racism, it's a sickness. And I've learned in my 34 years, you should never bet against a bigot's need to humiliate someone they think is beneath them. He leaned in. So I didn't set a trap. I just held up a mirror. And you lunged at it. That's when Harrington finally broke. The last piece of his pride shattered. I'll sue, he screamed, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. I'll sue you. I'll take this to the Supreme Court. I'll spend my last dime. I will destroy you. You'll never work in this town again. Do you hear me? The board members visibly flinched and shrank away from him. They knew it was over. They were already trying to calculate how to pledge loyalty to their new god Julian. Julian watched this apoplectic, pathetic tantrum with the cold, detached patience of a scientist watching a rat in a maze. He didn't respond. He didn't raise his voice. He let the old man's screams echo and die in the silent mahogany-walled tomb. When the screaming had faded to just a wheezing gasp, Julian slowly, deliberately, buttoned his suit jacket. A small, final, fastidious act of control. He walked to the great mahogany door. He stopped, his hand on the heavy, brass handle. He turned around, but he didn't look at Harrington. He looked at the rest of the board. The survivors. As of 11:05 a.m., he announced, and his voice was now the voice of their absolute master, I am your new creditor. I own every loan, every bond, every piece of steel, every railroad track. You don't work for Arthur anymore. He paused, letting the new reality sink in. You work for me. Then, and only then, did he finally look at Arthur Harrington, who had collapsed into his high-backed chair, a broken, empty old man. You didn't want to shake my hand, Arthur, Julian said, his voice now just a quiet, devastating whisper. You thought my $5 billion was good enough, but I wasn't. He pulled the heavy door open. Now, you'll have to ask me for a loan. And I don't do business with people like you. Julian Vance walked out. He didn't slam the door. He just left. He left them in the tomb. He left them in the silence. He left them to be devoured by the consequences. The man who refused to shake a hand had ended up handing over his entire kingdom. In a world built on old rules, sometimes you have to write your own. Respect isn't given, it's demanded. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the only one who truly understands the cost of dignity. Share this story if you believe that arrogance always has a price. Hit that like button if you want to see more stories of justice, and subscribe to Black Lives Story. Because sometimes, the new money is just old school respect.